Well, welcome to another episode of repairs to this poor old Triumph 2500 Mark 1. Now, a few episodes back, you may remember I was attempting to take the overdrive unit off the gearbox that came out of the car and put it on a gearbox that I'd had rebuilt. And I ran into somewhat of a problem with a little bush. It came out of the overdrive and it shouldn't have done. It should be a press-in fit. So I've had to wait for a new part. That has come now, and it is time to attempt to push that new one in. Now, I don't have a press. I'm hoping I can either tap it in or use a vise to get it in. Now, I have special tool XVIII, which is the bolts and washers, and my hope is to put that bush on there and sort of push that in down into the where it belongs. So let's get on with it. Now the bush is down in there. I made the mistake of sort of pushing it in to see how it fitted, and I can't get it out now, so it's there and I need to sort of push it all the way home, put some Loctite on it, and let's see what happens. Never been a great fan of Loctite, but there you go. We only need to get a drop or so down in here. Alright, first thing to try is to tap it and see how tight it is. Would help if I knew how far this was supposed to go down. It sounds like it's hit a stop point. Well, I've got another overdrive. I'm just going to pull that apart and see how far this bush is down inside that one. Well, that looks like that on a old one, and that's what it looks like on this one. I'm going to go with that is in the right spot. That was easier than I expected. Thank goodness for that. Well, now there's a bit of cleaning up to do, and gaskets and sealants and what have you, and we'll try and get this overdrive unit back together. Wish me luck. Well, I've been cleaning and scraping gaskets and cleaning and scraping gaskets for hours now, and this overdrive's had to come further apart than what I wanted. There's part of it that I can't get apart because it needs special tools and it needs to be pulled right apart in order to get a gasket in there, and that's this thing here, and a gasket goes down in here, and I can't do it. Now, it costs $1,200 apparently to have one of these rebuilt. That's Australian money. and this project's over budget by a long way, so I'm not going down that track. So this is exceedingly dodgy. Dodgy. The gasket, I've cut it. I've also cut it where the holes are, and I've got some silicone stuff here that's made for aluminium, and now I needed to take a mortgage out to buy this stuff, so I hope it works. Anyway, I'll put silicone on this gasket both sides, then I can feed it in, and yes, it will be cut, but hopefully the silicone will seal it up again. The rest of the gaskets are going to be fine, just put them together with this stuff. Now, having pulled this part so far, I haven't got faith in overdrive units, and so whether this all works when it goes back in the car is anybody's guess. Let's just cross every bloody thing and hope. Alrighty, let's get on with it. Well, these gaskets don't fit. End result, I've buggered this one, but it doesn't fit anyway. Used up untold silicone. Hope this stuff doesn't go off too quick. Guess I'll have to make another one. My goodness, this is a disaster. I don't know whether to stop now and go back to scratch, or whether to hope this silicone does a good job. It's horrible stuff. It's worse than ordinary silicone by a million miles. I think I'm going to start again because this is just not right. I think I need to get all this off, clean the silicone off while it's still wet, and maybe make some new gaskets, or try and buy some new ones. Well, I think it's back to the drawing board here. I'll need to make a couple of new gaskets and start all over again. I think I'll use ordinary silicone. This stuff's absolutely diabolical. And I'll either try and make some gaskets or see if I can buy some. I might make them, I think. So let's see what happens then. Well, it's another day. Yesterday was a total disaster. The gaskets I had just simply didn't fit, and ended up breaking them, and this fancy silicone I had was absolutely awful stuff. So now I'm going to have to make some gaskets. Before I do that, I'm going to make a template out of cardboard, and once I've got that, I can then transfer that over to gasket paper. That means I can stuff up without the expense of gasket paper getting wasted. And then I will use ordinary silicone, just ordinary gasket silicone, to put it all together once that part of it comes along. But first up, let's get on with making this gasket. Well, there's very little sort of bearing surface in some parts of this gasket. Having said that, I can't say I've ever noticed these gearboxes leaking oil between these gaskets. You know, the gearboxes leak oil in other places, but I can't say I've noticed it in this. But Alright, let's cut this out as best we can. Well, there we have one template of a gasket. How thin is it here? So very easy to break and tear. Now, as I explained yesterday, or earlier in the video if you want to look at it that way, one of these goes on like that, but the other one you can't do it because you'd have to disassemble the whole overdrive, and I can't do that. I haven't got the appropriate tools, experience, knowledge, blah blah blah. Consequently, I'm going to have to cut this gasket somewhere, as well as through where the bolt is, so I can poke it in. You can get a gap of about 1/4 inch, so I'll have to put silicone all over the gasket and then open it up and put it in and feed it around the bolts. Now that worked fine when I did it yesterday with the other gasket, but because the other gasket was smaller, it shrunk, or I don't know what had happened, it just basically, as you tried to feed it in, it ended up with a big gap, or ended up with things not lining up. So let's hope. So let's get on with making this in, well, we'll first see if it fits and maybe do some fine adjusting, and then we'll make it in gasket paper. Well, that fits quite well. Could possibly do with being a bit thicker on that side, which I'll do. So yeah, let's get on with making it in gasket paper. Well, it's time to attempt to put these gaskets into this overdrive. Now this one, which I can't get in because I can't pull the overdrive apart, I have sort of obviously cut it, and it's cut in places where the bolts go, and it will be siliconed on, and I guess it's going to break there as well, but anyway, it's better than nothing, and we'll see what happens. Well, that's one gasket on, but you can only do your best with these things. Now the gaskets are deliberately cut larger than they need to be, so they'll stick out. I'll trim that off in a few days' time once the all the silicon's dry. Alright, now it's time to put this back on. I haven't really pulled these apart, done much work on overdrives over the years. I didn't really realise that that was a lining up arrangement. I thought it just sat straight on. But it does need lining up, and I think that was what you call luck over arse or whatever. No doubt there's a torque wrench setting on them. I'll look that up and do that in a minute. That sounds like the phone. Oh, it's time to put what I think they call the sump on, the overdrive. again with a bit of silicone. Have I ever said how much I hate silicone? Alright, let's get this thing on. It only goes on one way, so we're lucky. Alrighty, that's that on. What's next? Well, I pulled this thing apart far more than I wanted to. So, yeah, this solenoid is not going to go back in now. I wasn't going to pull it out in the first place, but now it is out. I feel I need to put some new O-rings on there. So, I'll be buying new O-rings at some point when I'm buying a whole lot of other parts. So, that can't go back in just yet. I'll just stick a bit of rag in there or something. There is another gasket, and that is this gasket around here. Well, it's time to put another gasket on, which means more silicone. Well, that's the overdrive just about back together. Just this speedo drive to put back in now. And it should be ready to go on the gearbox. Now that is also one of those could be a disaster problems. We'll just have to wait and see. Well, on closer inspection I'm not going to put this speedo drive in because this plastic gear here that meshes with a gear in the overdrive is a bit mangled up, a bit stripped, so it might be a good idea to buy a new one, I think. So I'll leave that out for now. The next job is to put it on the gearbox, and that's a daunting prospect. I might trial fit it, try and get everything lined up, because otherwise I put a silicone on there and it mightn't work, and then I got to clean it all up again, and so let's get organised for that. Well, I've been working on trying to get this overdrive on the gearbox for days. I stopped filming a couple of days ago because it was just this endless cycle of it, the overdrive not going down onto the gearbox. About 3/8 of an inch, just wouldn't go any further. Basically, this little bush that came out that I replaced with a new one either wasn't lining up or wasn't going on to the end of the shaft that goes through the gearbox. Now, I either damaged it in the process of putting it in, or it was the wrong size, full stop. Now, this is the back end of the sort of overdrive unit, where the bush is down in there, and I sort of couldn't get it to go on, so I found a drill and just taped it to this bit of tube, because that size drill is the right size. So that was going to tell me whether down in this overdrive unit there was some problem with the size of the bush, or that something was out of line, or I don't know. Well, end result is this would not go into the bush. I thought it might have had a bit of a burr on it, so I turned it a few times by hand just to see what was going on, and it wasn't seemingly willing to go in at all. Anyway, at the end of the day, I've come to the conclusion that I either damaged the bush putting it in, or it was the wrong size. I think it was the wrong size, which is unlikely again, because I would have thought they'd all be the same. But at the end of the day it wouldn't go on, and so I resorted with no other option. I pulled this unit off another overdrive that I have, and it had a bush in it and I probably should have done this in the very first place. And I've then put that on to this overdrive unit. That meant cleaning it all and making more gaskets, and I don't know how many gaskets I've made and how much silicone I've put on and removed. So at the end of the day, I now have the overdrive all back together and ready to go on the gearbox. I am where I was about 2 days ago. And now getting this to go on is always a bit tricky, but I've always done it in the past. So let's give it a go. Well, the time has come to attempt to get this overdrive unit on the gearbox. Oh my goodness. By gum, you don't know how many hours I spent with that not doing that. It was like 3/8 of an inch to go and it wouldn't go any further. And there I go, and I put it on and it goes plop. Oh my goodness, let's get some bolts in it. Now most of these gaskets are homemade, and I made them too big deliberately. It makes them so you don't break them as easily. And I'll go around with a razor blade and trim it back once the silicone and everything's all dried in a day or two. So it looks a bit yucky at the moment, but that will change. Well, the next job is to put the top on, the gearbox, select the doohickey top of the gearbox. Then I'll have to do the clutch release bearing setup. And once the whole thing's back together, the switch on the top of the gear stick used to work, but it was dodgy, and there must be I suspect a bare wire down the gear stick itself. Anyway, it used to blow a fuse in the overdrive, once every 6 months. So I'm going to replace the wires that go down the middle of the gear stick, and I'm going to put a new switch in it because I've got one. I bought it years ago as a spare when I bought one for the dolly. So I still need to do that, and because this is not the gearbox that came out of it, I therefore need to put all the wiring on and check that those switches that isolate the overdrive so it doesn't work in first and second gear and the reverse light and all that sort of stuff. Those switches have got little shims under them that work on the height, and I need to make sure that they're properly shimmed because that's not the ones that came out of it. Once all that's done, I will paint it in that cast iron heat resisting paint. It's called cast iron, that's the colour, but it looks, when it's done and dusted, like aluminium. And then I'll be ready to go onto the engine, but the engine's still a couple of weeks away, so anyway, let's get on with putting this selector top doohickey on. Alrighty, let's get the top of the gearbox on, with selectors, whatever you want to call it. Now, the two selectors have to line up with the sort of groovy things in the doohickey things here, and there's a another doohickey there that's got to line up, so let's do that. Now, let's hope that this all works. Alright, next job is the front bearing. I'll have to find that, and the carrier. Not sure where that is either. Alright, let's get on with that. Alright, onwards to the next job. Now the next job is I'm going to put the bearing that pushes on the pressure plate. Not throw-out bearing, is it? I've already put the new bearing on this sort of doohickey, and it then slides on to the shaft here in the gearbox and the bell housing, you know. So let's get on with it. Alright, first thing I got to do is get some grease on here. Need to get grease inside this to make sure it slides freely. It's always a bit of a don't want too much, don't want not enough scenario. It's got to last the lifetime of the clutch, so which it ain't going to do, but it'll be right. It'll be right. Now, there's a pin goes up through the sort of yoke thingy that pushes on this. This pin holds it in place. Now these often rust in place because this gearbox has been all rebuilt. This has all been cleaned up and made to work. So the other thing I need, little doohickeys, little square section doohickeys that go on I've come across gearboxes where this pin is rusted in, and you go to undo that the square section nut here and it just shears off, but the pin's still in there. And I've come across gearboxes where people have had to cut this shaft to get it out. I've come across others where people have welded this yoke to the shaft, which makes it near on impossible to replace the bearing. So yeah, you come across some dodgy sort of workmanship on some occasions. Now the other thing that you need to do with this is this shaft here, over here, this shaft here, where the slave cylinder pushes on. Need to make sure that doesn't move anywhere, because in the process of mucking around with this gearbox, that can all come out and sort of get jammed up. So I find a bit of string, tie it back. That's the bearing end. On to the next job. Now the next job I think I'll do is the rear seal, the back of the gearbox, and I've already taken this flange off and give it a bit of paint, but I've got to get the old seal out. So let's get on with that. Alright, let's get this rear seal out. Now, this whole back part of this overdrive is the one I had to use as a second-hand one off one of my old overdrives, because the overdrive that came off of this car already had a new seal in it, and that's unfortunate, but that's the way it turned out. So I'll have to get this seal out. Now we'll attempt it with just a screwdriver, but we might have to take other steps. Oh, that came out easier than I was expecting. Now the sealers going back in it, it's the best thing since sliced bread, I can tell you. I've replaced these seals in the dolly endlessly over the years, and they just keep leaking. You know, but this is some new thing. Totally different design sort of thing. And the one I put in the other end of the overdrive sealed the gearbox up and no more leaks. It was like a miracle, giving the Triumph leak oil. Having said that, they can be a bit hard to put in, because I'm not even sure that this is actually made for a Triumph, and whether that someone has sort of searched around for the measurements and found one that sort of fits. I don't know, but I do know it was a bit hard to get in. So let's do that. There you go. Now, I'm going to put some rubber grease on here as well, just so the seal doesn't get damaged in the process of putting this on. Now this is a nylock headed nut, and I can't lock the gearbox up, so I can only put it on as tight as I can. Now put new O-rings on this solenoid, so that should be good. And there should be a copper washer. Now I'm not a great one, as I keep saying, for silicon, but I'm really trying to make sure this engine and gearbox doesn't leak oil. So I'm just going to put a little bit of silicon, and I mean a little bit, around in case this copper washer, it's a second-hand copper washer, so might not seal as well as it should. Alright, that's the solenoid on. Now the next job is going to be these switches. Now these switches operate the sort of cutout on the overdrive, so it doesn't work in first, second and reverse, and one of them works the reversing lights. Now these switches, now this gearbox is a rebuilt gearbox, so these aren't the switches that came out of the car. Now I know the ones out of the car worked, so I'm going to take them off the old gearbox and put them on this one, just to be sure. Now those have little shims underneath them that give them the height that, where there's a little sort of groove in the selector thing that turns them on and off, and so you need to get that right. Now I'm just going to put the same sort of shims from the old gearbox on this one, and then Probably not in this video, but in another one I will do a check on the electrics and readjust them as and if required. So let's get on with that. Well, it's time to paint this gearbox. I'm just using, it's called heat paint. It's the sort of paint you paint engines with and exhaust with. It's called cast iron. It looks like aluminium when it dries, so that sticks pretty good. I've done a few things with it over the years, manifolds, inlet manifolds and gearboxes mostly. Let's get on with it. Well, that's the gearbox done and dusted. It isn't absolutely 100%. I've got to put oil in it. I've got to do up the bolt at the end of the gearbox there. Can't do that till it's in the car. Don't want to put oil in it yet until some of the silicon's dry. I've got to test the electrics. So there's a couple of little things to do, but for all intents and purposes the gearbox is done and dusted. So yeah, all good. That brings me to the end of this episode. So tune in, same duck time, same duck channel, for more mechanical mayhem on this poor old Triumph 2500 Mark 1. When you'll see me working on the engine, more than likely. The engine builder's still got the engine to bore and grind the crank. He hasn't done it yet, so there might be a gap between this episode and the next one. There's a few things I can do to the car still. The master cylinder needs pulling off and rebuilding, and just a few little things, but for the most part I'm done and dusted till the engine comes back. Anyway, bye for now.